Minister, we've come very far since the Green Party's sustainable energy legislation brought in standards for new builds through the Part L regulation. These regulations have brought more people out of the fuel poverty trap than any other policy. We now have some of the best standards in the world for eliminating fossil fuel use to heat our domestic buildings. However, the construction sector is still one of the biggest emitters of CO2. This carbon is embodied in construction materials, whether it's through the excavation, the production, the manufacture, the transport, the construction and its end-of-life disposal. In the European context, we are well behind the curve as many countries have mandated their state bodies to procure using life cycle assessment practices, where materials have EPDs or environmental product declarations or ECIs, environmental cost indicators. These acronyms assist designers to procure buildings in a way that reduces embodied carbon, this being separate from NZEB carbon emissions. This type of procurement practice is enshrined in the EU Green Public Procurement Directive, which was published in 2004. Since then, we've gone through 2 economic cycles, yet 16 years later, we've not implemented this policy that is designed to reduce CO2 emissions. I've gratefully been briefed by your department, who appear to be unaware of these sustainable procurement practices, which are widespread in the EU and having the intention of reducing embodied carbon. Can the Minister explain why his department has been unable to implement the Green Public Procurement Policy 16 years after its inception, considering the positive environmental, social and economic benefits it would bring?
Thanks, Deputy Duffy, and I'm glad we had a chance to discuss this again. I know we've had a few briefing sessions with our department officials on this as well, and you probably had a lot of discussion with Sharon Armstrong, which will be one of our leading guys in this area too. And there's a commitment of our department there to work in this area. As you know, we are involved in the EU working group, which is probably the key one on the embodied carbon and construction materials and the whole life cycle costs of construction. But we're not prepared to go ahead of Europe or the working group with that. We want to work with them on that because it affects the construction products and the regulations around that and availability of products and materials for sale in this country and across European levels as well. So that's where we want to concentrate our work, working with European level, naturally pushing the agenda to go far with that as well. But we will be in a place to make changes with this whole embodied carbon and construction materials in line with our European colleagues as well over the next, possibly, I don't know how long that will take, that working group as well, but I believe they're quite busy on that, and they are meeting quite regularly, and so we should see a harmonised procedure to move on this space over the next year or two, or maybe even before that. But I think you rightly recognise we've made a lot of changes to the build regulations, and we discussed them earlier on here today as well, over the last couple of years. But we brought the sector with us on that journey, because we've had a lot of consultation to reach where we are now today, which is the NZEB, and that didn't just happen overnight, because it does impact the cost of housing, the construction of housing, all involved in that sector. We now need to put a lot of money in. It was referenced by a number of contributors earlier on around the training and apprentices and so on. There's a lot of potential here in dealing with our new housing and planning regulations, our new NZEB targets, but also the retrofit programme as well. And that's where we need to focus a lot of our resources, I think, as well, to bring all those involved in the overall construction sector. Not just to have regulations, but to develop the real culture behind that as well. I think that's where you're coming from too, that we really think the whole process fully through, but that everybody buys into it as well. And that comes with good regulations. We've made a lot of changes by different governments over the last probably 3 or 4 governments over the years at a reasonable pace has made changes that as well. And we're prepared to make more in conjunction with our European colleagues when it comes to the products as well. So I think we're on the right path where you want us to go. And I know you've been involved in consultation, and I look forward to continue that conversation with you, whether we're in opposition or government or working together or on opposite sides of the house. I think most people in here accept the changes we have to make when it comes to the built environment, and that's what we made progress on with the support of all parties, I would say, in this house that I can recognise over the last couple of years.
Duffy.
Thank you, Minister. Supposed to comment back on that. My understanding is most of Europe are moving ahead, and for some reason we're kind of it feels like kind of stirring a pot with this kind of embodied carbon in materials, construction materials in particular. And the Dutch have been working on it since 2012. They have various standards and procurement processes in place at the moment that work to take out that embodied carbon. And I just think from what I'm hearing from your department is, and I don't like saying it, but it's kind of spin, because it looks like the Scandinavians, the French and the English are already on board, and there's a misconnect there somewhere. When I mentioned EPDs to them, or environmental product declarations, they didn't know what I was talking about, and that's the fear I have, that they're not even there yet. So I have a second question, and it's with respect to the planning and climate action transition. This state has a horrendous legacy when it comes to its planning strategy on public transport and the welfare of commuters. During the 40s and the 50s, we virtually removed all rail links and completely removed Dublin trams. However, one of the many tangible benefits of EU membership for many Irish people has been the EU structural funds. Unfortunately, since the 90s, we've spent and continue to spend funding on road building at the expense of public transport. Portugal, for example, has a comparable economic status to us. However, they invested heavily into public transport, and their network is now far ahead of ours, both intercity and inner city, with underground and intercity fast-speed connections. Our current model does not serve society. Most people have to purchase cars in Ireland to move from A to B. People are then subject to all the expenses of car ownership that entails and leads to a lower, I suppose, quality of life as a result of that expense. Even in our capital, the public transport network is not fit for purpose. Not mention our commuter counties, people have long commutes within our city, taking up to an hour and a half or sometimes 2 hours to move within the city. Last year, the members of the East and Midlands Regional Assembly, I was a member myself, made policy to provide for sustainable public transport. This policy included opening the Navan rail line and extending the airport metro to the southwest quadrant of the city. Unfortunately, unelected decision makers seem to have forced your minister to repeal this democratic process. Minister, do you believe it is inappropriate or is appropriate that elected public representatives at regional assembly level should have sustainable planning policies overturned by unelected officials? Minister.
Again, there's 2 points there, but I want to go back to your first comment first. I think it's totally and utterly unfair to say that officials in my department are involved in spin, and that's something they're not. It is factual to say, and I'll factually give it to you. There is an EU level. Correct. Well, just to be clear, I won't. What are some of the spin paying? But I mean, I have to say, very often it's how people throw out spin. But as actually, if you're in a government and when you're answering PQs and asking questions here, you cannot do spin, because you guys can get away with it, but actually the government can't. So, and then to go a step further and say that the officials are doing it is wrong, Deputy Duffy, and you've been at meetings with them as well. So just to be clear for the record, I'm going to deal with this for the record. There is at EU level, there's a framework that's been put in place on the construction products regulation to looking at the impacts of the wider environment that occur during the whole life cycle of a construction product. You want to use different terminology, that's what it's about. Right? The Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government are participating in that EU working group for the development of this framework, and the EU stakeholder consultation is currently taking place. Ireland will be obliged to follow this harmonised procedure versus harmonised technical specifications for construction products when a consensus of approach emerges. So we're all on one here in Europe. And in that regard, it will be counter to harmonisation to develop national rules for matters covered by the international market regulation, because we're involved in a trade with all our other European partners as well. So just to be clear on that, it's no spin. We're involved in it. They do understand it. They know it very, very well. But in conversations, you might want to talk about something different. They know what they're talking about. I think it's not fair to their reputation to say what you said here. I want to correct that as well. In relation to the overall planning then and the importance of public investment in public transport, I think we all recognise that too. The current national planning framework and the 10-year investment plan that goes with the first half of that is a 2-to-1 split in terms of spend on public transport versus roads. Absolutely, everybody agree that where at all possible, it's better to have public transport and invest in that and give people the choice to use it. Some places it's not a choice just yet. It will be if we have proper planning and densification models over the country and disperse the population of the future growth in a proper, clever way that makes it viable to provide more public transport. And that has been done, and it's in that plan as well, and I would support it. One thing I would say to you, because it's often misrepresented what happened with the Navan rail line. I'm in the department. I work in that department. I felt it came on my desk along with Minister Murphy's as well. We didn't or have not prevented at all the Navan rail line because it's something that I wanted. I've been campaigning for over the last 20 years. What happened was the wording in the regional plan being put forward wasn't right and was out of sync with the proper planning and development because the current sorry, this is important. This is important, Chair. Sorry, I'm sorry for taking my time, Concorde, but the current study didn't recommend the rail line, even though I wanted it, didn't recommend it. There's a new one at the moment, which hopefully will recommend that you will have a Navan rail line, and then the wording can change in the regional plan. But your wording was wrong, and members knew that, and to be a little bit clever. It's wrong to say a minister is blocking on the photo beneficial as well.
Thank you.